Tommy looked up at the massive plasma conduit running along the ceiling of Docking Bay 7. The blue energy hummed through the thick cables, powering the artificial gravity systems that kept everyone's feet planted firmly on the deck plating. He adjusted his tool belt and checked his scanner one more time. The readings showed everything was working perfectly, just like it had been for the past 3 months since he installed the new coupling arrays. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the bay behind him. Tommy didn't need to turn around to know what was coming. The distinctive thud, 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 thud pattern meant Krallick's warriors were approaching, their forearms swinging in rhythm as they walked. He kept working on his diagnostic, hoping they would just pass by like most days. "Look what we have here, brothers," a deep voice rumbled in heavily accented standard. "The tiny human is playing with big machines again." Tommy sighed and turned around slowly. 3 Kralliks stood about 10 feet away, their reptilian faces showing the same cruel amusement he had seen too many times before. Each one stood nearly 8 feet tall, with scales that shifted color from green to brown depending on the light. Their forearms ended in clawed hands that could easily crush a human skull, and their yellow eyes glowed with intelligence and malice. The leader, a warrior named Grex, stepped closer. His scales were darker than the others, marked with ritual scars that showed his rank in their military hierarchy. "Tell me, little soft flesh, how did such a weak creature get permission to work on this station? Did you beg the administrators? Did you cry like human children do?" The other 2 Kralliks laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Tommy had heard that laugh too many times to count. He kept his voice steady and respectful, knowing that showing anger would only make things worse. "I'm just doing my job, sir. The plasma conduits need regular maintenance to keep the docking systems operational." Grex moved even closer, looming over Tommy like a mountain of muscle and scales. "Your job? Listen to this one. He thinks maintaining equipment is a job for warriors. In the Kralliks Empire, only our slaves do such menial work." "But look at how small he is," said one of the others, a younger warrior with bright green scales. "Even our slaves are larger and stronger than this." "Human, how can something so pathetic be trusted with important systems?" Tommy felt his jaw tighten but forced himself to remain calm. He had learned long ago that arguing with species who measured worth by physical size was pointless. Instead, he focused on packing up his tools, hoping to finish quickly and move on to another section of the station. Grex noticed Tommy's movements and smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Oh, the little human wants to run away." "Oh, we're not finished talking to you yet, soft flesh." The Kralliks leader reached out with one of his massive hands and grabbed the plasma coupling that Tommy had just finished calibrating. With a deliberate twist, he broke the delicate connection, sending sparks flying across the deck plating. The lights in the docking bay flickered as power fluctuated through the damaged system. "Oops," Grex said with mock concern. "I seem to have broken your work. You better fix that before someone gets hurt." Tommy stared at the damaged coupling for a long moment. Hours of careful work had been destroyed in seconds, and now he would have to start the entire calibration process over again. The replacement? Parts were stored 3 levels down in the maintenance section, and carrying them back up would take at least an hour. "Is there a problem, human?" asked the younger Kralliks. "You look upset. Are you going to cry?" "No, sir," Tommy replied quietly. "I'll fix it right away." The 3 warriors laughed again as Tommy gathered his tools and headed toward the maintenance lift. As he walked away, he heard Grex call out behind him, "Remember this lesson, soft flesh. Humans are weak creatures who exist to serve their betters. The sooner you accept this truth, the easier your life will become." Tommy stepped into the lift and pressed the button for level 12. As the doors closed, he leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. The Kralliks were not the only species who treated humans this way, but they were certainly the most aggressive about it. In the 2 years he had worked on Omega Station, Tommy had endured countless insults and acts of sabotage from various alien species, who saw humans as inferior. The worst part was that Station Command did nothing to stop it. Administrator Vorthak, a member of the bureaucratic Centauri species, had made it clear that maintaining peace between species was more important than protecting individual workers. As long as the harassment didn't escalate to actual violence, Tommy and the other humans were expected to endure it quietly. The lift reached level 12 and Tommy made his way to the parts storage facility. The automated systems recognized his engineering credentials and dispensed the replacement coupling he needed. As he waited for the heavy equipment to be loaded onto a transport cart, Tommy wondered if things would ever change. He had grown up on Earth hearing stories about humanity's expansion into the galaxy, about brave explorers and brilliant scientists who had earned the respect of alien civilizations through their achievements. The reality had proven quite different. Most alien species viewed humans as a young, weak race that had stumbled into space. Travel through luck rather than skill. The transport cart beeped to signal that loading was complete. Tommy checked the equipment manifest and began the journey. Back to docking bay 7, he knew the Kralliks would probably be gone by now, moved on to torment someone else or return to their ship. But the damaged coupling would still be waiting for him, along with several more hours of tedious repair. Work. As the lift carried him back up through the station's levels, Tommy looked out through the transparent aluminum windows at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there was Earth, his homeworld where humans were the dominant species. But here on Omega Station, in this intersection of galactic civilization, he was just another small creature struggling to prove his worth in a universe that measured value by size and strength. The lift doors opened onto docking bay 7. Tommy pushed his cart toward the damaged coupling, already planning the repair sequence in his head. He had work to do. The alert klaxon echoed through every corridor of Omega Station at exactly 1400 hours. Tommy looked up from the power distribution panel he was recalibrating, recognizing the three-tone sequence that meant an unscheduled arrival of significant importance. Normal traffic used single tones, merchant vessels used two tones, but three tones were reserved for military ships or diplomatic vessels carrying high-ranking officials around him. The normal chatter and activity of the station's main engineering level began to quiet. Even the Kralliks' work crews stopped their constant arguing to listen as Administrator Vorthic's voice came over the communication system. Attention all station personnel. We have received a priority docking request from an Apex vessel. All non-essential personnel are to remain in their current locations until further notice. Essential personnel will maintain standard operations but avoid unnecessary movement through the primary corridors. Tommy felt his blood run cold. Apex were the species that every other race in the galaxy feared and respected in equal measure. They were the ultimate predators, beings so perfectly evolved for combat that they had never lost a war in recorded galactic history. Most species considered themselves lucky if they went their entire lives without encountering an apex in person. The engineering bay, where Tommy worked, fell completely silent. Even the constant hum of machinery seemed muted as everyone processed what they had just heard. Apex rarely left their home systems, and when they did, it usually meant someone was about to die or something extremely important was happening. Marcus, the human shift supervisor, walked over to Tommy's workstation. His face was pale and his hands shook slightly as he checked his datapad. Tommy, finish up whatever you're working on and secure your tools. I want all critical systems checked and double-checked before that ship docks. If an Apex is coming here, we can't afford to have anything malfunction. Tommy nodded and began running final diagnostics on the power distribution panel. Through the transparent walls of the engineering section, he could see beings from dozens of species hurrying through the corridors with obvious anxiety. Conversation was limited to whispered exchanges and even the normally arrogant Zentari. Administrators looked nervous. The station's main viewing screens activated, showing the approach of the Apex vessel. Tommy had seen pictures of their ships before, but witnessing one in person was something entirely different. The craft was sleek and black, shaped like a giant blade cutting through space. No external lights or decorative elements broke its smooth surface. It looked less like a spaceship and more like a weapon that had been designed to travel between stars. Docking Bay 1 has been cleared for the Apex vessel, came another announcement from Administrator Vorthok. Security teams Alpha through Delta will maintain perimeter positions. All other personnel are reminded to avoid the primary docking level unless specifically authorized. Tommy continued his work, but his mind kept wandering to stories. He had heard about the Apex. They were said to be 12 feet tall with obsidian black scales that could deflect energy weapons. Their natural claws could cut through most metals, and they possessed strength that made even the mighty Krolix look weak by comparison. Most terrifying of all were their intelligence and tactical skills, which had allowed them to dominate every species they had ever encountered in battle. The docking procedures took nearly an hour. Apex ships used different connection protocols than most galactic standard vessels, requiring special modifications to the station's systems. Tommy watched the status displays as dock workers scrambled to accommodate the unusual requirements. Finally, the green light appeared on the main status board, indicating that docking was complete. The entire station seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Administrator Vorthak's office was located just 2 levels above the engineering section, and Tommy could imagine the stress the Zentari official must be feeling. Vorthak was responsible for maintaining order and peace on Omega Station, but Apex operated by their own rules. If they decided the station was not meeting their standards, they could leave or worse, depending on their mood. An hour passed with no further announcements. Tommy finished securing the power distribution panel and began checking the backup life support systems. Around him, other workers moved quietly through their tasks, speaking only when necessary and keeping their voices low. Then the communication system activated again, but this time it was not Administrator Vorthak's voice. The speaker was deeper, with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the station's hull. Every being on Omega Station recognized instantly that they were hearing an Apex speak. "I am Commander, Razor of the Apex Defense Fleet. I require the immediate assistance of a specific individual for urgent ship repairs. Bring me the human engineer Tommy." Tommy dropped his diagnostic scanner. The tool clattered to the deck plating, as he stared at the nearest speaker, certain he had misheard. But the silence around him confirmed that every other being in the engineering bay had heard the same thing. Marcus rushed over, his face showing complete confusion. "Tommy, did that Apex just ask for you by name? How is that possible? Have you ever met an Apex before?" Tommy shook his head slowly, unable to speak. He had never encountered an Apex in his life. He had never even seen one except in historical documents and training materials. The idea that one of them would know his name was impossible. The communication system activated once more, and Commander Razor's voice filled the station again. This time there was an edge of impatience in his tone. "Administrator Vorthak, I am waiting for the human engineer Tommy. Do not send substitutes or alternatives. I specifically require this individual." Within minutes, a security escort arrived at the engineering bay. 2 Zentari guards flanked a nervous-looking administrator, who kept checking his datapad as if hoping the information would change. "Engineer Tommy, you are requested in Docking Bay 1 immediately. Please gather any specialized tools you might need for ship repairs and come with us." Tommy looked around the engineering bay at his co-workers. Every face showed the same expression of bewilderment and concern. Humans were not important enough to be specifically requested by Apex predators. There had to be some kind of mistake, but as Tommy gathered his tools and followed the escort toward the lift, he could not shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The walk to Docking Bay 1 felt like the longest journey of Tommy's life. The security escort moved quickly through corridors that had been cleared of normal traffic, their footsteps echoing in the unusual silence. Tommy carried his tool case, with hands that trembled slightly, his mind racing through every possible explanation for why an Apex would know his name. When they reached the primary docking level, Tommy could see that Administrator Vorthak had assembled a significant security presence. Zentari guards stood at every intersection, their energy weapons powered but held in non-threatening positions. Despite their preparations, Tommy noticed that none of the guards looked particularly confident about their ability to handle an Apex. If things went wrong, the massive doors to Docking Bay 1 stood open, revealing the interior of the Apex vessel. Tommy had expected something militaristic and harsh, but the ship's design was surprisingly elegant. Smooth curves and organic lines suggested that Apex engineering principles were quite different from the angular, functional approaches used by most galactic civilizations. "Wait here," one of the Zentari administrators told Tommy. "Commander Razor will summon you when he is ready." Tommy stood just outside the docking bay entrance, watching as Administrator Vorthak approached the Apex ship. The Zentari official looked tiny next to the vessel's boarding ramp, and when Commander Razor emerged, the size difference became even more dramatic. The Apex commander was everything the stories had described and more. Standing 12 feet tall with obsidian black scales that seemed to absorb light, Razor moved with a fluid grace that spoke of perfect physical coordination. Bioluminescent markings along his arms and neck pulsed in slow, steady patterns that Tommy somehow found oddly calming rather than threatening. "Administrator Vorthak," Razor's voice rumbled across the docking bay. "Where is the human engineer I requested?" "Commander, with respect, are you certain you have the correct individual? We have several qualified human engineers aboard the station, including some with more experience than the one you specifically named." Razor's head turned toward the docking bay entrance, and his eyes met Tommy's across the distance. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, the Apex commander studied the small human with an intensity that should have been terrifying. Instead, Tommy felt a strange sense of recognition, as if he was looking at someone he had met before, but could not quite remember. "Bring him to me," Razor said simply. "Now." Tommy walked across the docking bay on unsteady legs, very aware that dozens of eyes were watching his every step. When he reached the base of the boarding ramp, he had to crane his neck back to look up at Commander Razor's face. The Apex's features were sharp and predatory, but there was something in his expression that Tommy did not expect. Intelligence, yes, but also what looked almost like warmth. "Tommy," Razor said, and his voice was much quieter now, intended only for the human's ears. "You do not remember me, do you?" Tommy shook his head, confused and increasingly certain that he was caught up in some kind of mistake. "Sir, I think there might be some confusion. I've never met an Apex before today." Razor's bioluminescent markings pulsed in a pattern that Tommy somehow understood as amusement. "Come aboard my ship. We have much to discuss, and the conversation requires privacy." The Apex commander turned and walked up the boarding ramp, clearly expecting Tommy to follow. After a moment's hesitation, Tommy did exactly that, leaving behind the worried faces of the station personnel. Inside the ship, the elegant design continued. The corridors were wide enough to accommodate Razor's massive frame comfortably, with lighting that seemed to come from the walls themselves rather than fixed fixtures. Tommy noticed that the ship was surprisingly quiet, with none of the mechanical humming that characterized most galactic vessels. Razor led him to what appeared to be a private cabin, furnished with simple but comfortable-looking furniture sized. For an Apex, the commander gestured for Tommy to sit in a chair that had obviously been added recently for smaller visitors. 5 years ago," Razor began, settling into a chair across from Tommy, "I was not a commander. I was barely an adult by Apex standards, serving as a scout for one of our exploration fleets. My assignment was to conduct preliminary surveys of uninhabited systems in Sector Gamma 7. Tommy listened carefully, trying to understand where this story was leading. Sector Gamma 7 was on the outer edge of explored space, far from the major trade routes and populated systems. During that mission, my scout ship encountered a quantum storm of unusual intensity. The storm damaged my navigation systems and threw me off course, eventually forcing me to make an emergency landing on a small planet in an uncharted system." As Razor spoke, fragments of memory began stirring in Tommy's mind. 5 years ago, he had been serving aboard the UES Horizon, a human exploration vessel conducting deep space surveys. They had encountered a massive quantum storm that had damaged their ship and forced them to seek shelter on the nearest habitable planet. "The crash landing injured me severely," Razor continued. "A rock slide triggered by my ship's impact trapped me under several tons of debris. My emergency beacon was damaged and I was slowly dying from internal injuries and dehydration. Tommy's eyes widened as the memories suddenly came flooding back. The human survey team had detected the Apex ship's crash site during their own emergency repairs. Most of the crew had argued that investigating was too dangerous, that they should focus on fixing their own vessel and calling for rescue. "You came alone," Razor said. And now his bioluminescent markings were pulsing in patterns that Tommy recognized as expressions of deep emotion. "While your crewmates worked on their distress beacon, you took a small exploration kit and went to investigate the crash site." Tommy remembered that decision clearly now. He had been the junior engineer on the horizon, ignored by most of the senior crew and considered expendable for dangerous assignments. When Captain Reynolds had mentioned the alien crash site, Tommy had volunteered to investigate, thinking it might be his chance to prove his worth to the team. "You found me trapped under rocks that would have taken a full engineering team with heavy equipment to move safely, but you did not leave. For 3 days you worked alone to dig me out piece by piece, using nothing but hand tools and determination." The memories were vivid now. Tommy recalled the massive alien trapped beneath the rockslide, clearly dying but still conscious and aware. He had known it was probably an apex from the moment he saw the distinctive scales and bone structure, but he had also known that letting any intelligent being die when he could help was not something he could live with. "You shared your water with me when your own supplies were running low. You used your medical kit to treat my injuries, even though you had no training in apex physiology. When your rescue ship finally arrived, you insisted that they treat my injuries before completing their own repairs." Razor leaned forward in his chair, his massive frame somehow managing to convey both power and gentleness. "Tommy, in my culture, what you did creates a bond that transcends species boundaries. You saved my life when you could have simply left me to die. You gave me your resources when doing so put your own survival at risk. In Apex tradition, this makes you my bond brother, a relationship more sacred than blood family." Tommy sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by both the recovered memories and the magnitude of what Razor was telling him. He had acted on instinct and basic human compassion, never considering that his actions might have such profound meaning. "In Apex culture, I have spent 5 years searching for you," Razor continued. "Tracking the registration of your ship, following your career records, waiting for an opportunity to properly acknowledge the debt I owe you. When I learned you were stationed here, I came immediately." The Apex commander stood and moved to a storage panel, retrieving an ornate box made from what looked like polished metal. He opened it carefully, revealing a set of curved blades that gleamed with their own inner light. "These are my family's ceremonial claws, passed down through 17 generations of Apex warriors. By our most sacred traditions, I offer them to you as a symbol of our bond brotherhood. From this day forward, you are not just Tommy the human engineer. You are Tommy, bond brother to the Apex, protected by our honor and worthy of our respect." Tommy stared at the ceremonial weapons, understanding instinctively that he was being offered something of incredible value and significance. The small human who had been mocked and dismissed by other species was being recognized by one of the galaxy's apex predators as family. Tommy held the ceremonial claws in his hands, feeling their perfect balance and the way they seemed to warm to his touch. The metal was unlike anything he had ever encountered, seeming to shift and flow slightly as if it were alive. Razor watched him with an expression that somehow managed to convey both pride and affection despite his predatory features. "I cannot accept these," Tommy said quietly. "They belong to your family, your people. I'm just a human who did what anyone would have done." Razor's bioluminescent markings flared brighter, and he leaned forward with obvious intensity. "Tommy, you saved my life when doing so gained you nothing and cost you much. You treated me as a being worthy of rescue when most species would have fled in terror. This is not what anyone would have done. This is what a warrior does. What family does." The weight of the moment pressed down on Tommy as he realized that refusing the gift would be more insulting than accepting it. In Apex culture, he was learning honor and respect were not abstract concepts, but living forces that shaped every interaction. If I accept these, what does that mean? What are my obligations as your bond brother? It means that you will never face danger alone while I live. It means that anyone who threatens you threatens me, and anyone who honors you honors family line. It means that when other species look at you, they will see not just a human, but a being worthy of apex protection. Tommy carefully placed the ceremonial claws back in their case, then looked up at Razor with new understanding. And it means that this bond must be made public, doesn't it? Otherwise, it has no meaning. Razor's expression shifted to what Tommy was beginning to recognize as approval. You understand quickly, bond brother. Yes, the recognition must be witnessed and acknowledged. Will you allow me to honor you properly before the inhabitants of this station? Tommy thought about the Kralix warriors who had mocked him just hours earlier, about Administrator Vorthak who treated humans as disposable workers, about all the species who had dismissed him as weak and irrelevant. The prospect of public recognition by an apex was both thrilling and terrifying. What exactly would this ceremony involve? We will go to the station's central plaza. I will perform the ritual of bond brotherhood before witnesses from as many species as possible. It is a simple ceremony, but its implications will be understood by every culture in the galaxy. Within an hour, word had spread throughout Omega Station that Commander Razor was planning a public ceremony in the central plaza. Beings from dozens of species gathered in the massive space, drawn by curiosity and the rare opportunity to witness Apex culture firsthand. Tommy walked beside Razor through corridors that had been packed with onlookers, acutely aware that he was about to become the center of attention in a way he had never imagined. The central plaza was a vast, circular space. At the heart of the station, rising 5 levels high with viewing balconies on each floor. By the time they arrived, hundreds of beings had assembled, representing nearly every major species in the galaxy. Tommy spotted the Kralix warriors who had tormented him earlier, now standing well back from the center of the plaza with expressions of confusion and concern. Administrator Vorthak approached nervously, clearly uncertain about the protocol for such an unprecedented event. Commander Razor, if you require any special arrangements for your ceremony... No arrangements are necessary, Razor replied, his voice carrying easily across the plaza. This ritual requires only witnesses and truth. The Apex commander moved to the center of the space, and the crowd fell silent. Even species that normally showed no fear of anything seemed awed by Razor's presence. Tommy followed, very conscious that every eye in the plaza was now focused on him. Razor began to speak, his voice resonating through the station's acoustic systems so that every being present could hear clearly. Citizens of Omega Station, you are witness to an ancient tradition of my people. Today I acknowledge a bond brotherhood that was forged 5 years ago through courage, sacrifice, and honor. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that they were about to witness something significant. Tommy could see beings frantically activating recording devices, understanding that this moment would likely be studied and discussed throughout the galaxy. This human, Tommy, saved my life when I was dying on a distant world. He risked his own survival to preserve mine, shared his resources when doing so threatened his own rescue, and treated me with dignity when he could have simply left me to die. Razor reached into his belt and withdrew the case containing the ceremonial clause. As he opened it, the polished metal caught the plaza's lighting and threw brilliant reflections across the walls. By the sacred traditions of the Apex, I name Tommy as my bond brother. Let all who witness this ceremony understand that his courage exceeds his size, his honor surpasses his strength, and his friendship is more valuable than all the weapons in our armory. The Apex commander knelt on one knee, bringing his massive frame down to Tommy's eye level. He placed the ceremonial claws at Tommy's feet with movements that spoke of reverence and deep respect. Tommy, bond brother, will you accept this recognition and the responsibilities that come with it? Tommy looked around the plaza at hundreds of faces showing expressions ranging from shock to awe to disbelief. The Kralix warriors who had mocked him earlier were staring with obvious confusion, unable to process what they were witnessing. Administrator Vorthak's mouth hung open as he tried to understand the implications of having an apex-protected human on his station. "I accept," Tommy said, his voice surprisingly steady, "and I am honored by your friendship, Bond brother." Razor stood and placed one massive hand on Tommy's shoulder. The gesture was gentle but unmistakably protective, and its meaning was clear to every being in the plaza. The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice. Grex, the lead Kralix warrior, pushed through the crowd with his usual arrogance intact. "This is ridiculous," he announced loudly. "Apex or not, this human is still weak and worthless. One alien's delusion does not change the reality of human inferiority." The temperature in the plaza seemed to drop several degrees as Razor turned his attention to the Kralix warrior. When the Apex spoke, his voice carried undertones that made several nearby beings step back nervously. "You question my judgment, Kralix?" Grex faltered slightly but maintained his aggressive posture. "I question whether any human deserves such honor, regardless of who grants it." Razor's bioluminescent markings began pulsing in rapid, angry patterns. "Then perhaps you would like to test the worthiness of my Bond brother directly. I propose a challenge of intelligence and skill to be judged by neutral observers." Tommy felt his stomach drop. The last thing he wanted was to be put on display in some kind of contest, especially one proposed by an angry Apex in front of hundreds of witnesses, but Grex's pride would not allow him to back down. What kind of challenge? A test of engineering, knowledge, and problem-solving ability. 3 complex technical scenarios to be solved using only the resources available in this plaza. If Tommy succeeds, you will publicly acknowledge his competence. If he fails, I will reconsider the wisdom of my Bond brotherhood. Tommy wanted to object, to point out that he had not agreed to any such test, but he could see in Razor's eyes that this was about more than just defending Tommy's abilities. This was about establishing the credibility of Apex judgment and the reality of Bond brotherhood in front of the entire galactic community. "I accept the challenge," Tommy said, surprising himself with his own decisiveness. Grex smiled, showing his predatory teeth. "Excellent. Let us see what this supposedly worthy human can actually accomplish." The first challenge came from a Zentari engineer who had been watching from the upper balconies. She produced a damaged power coupling similar to the one Grex had broken earlier, but this one showed signs of quantum cascade failure, a problem that typically required specialized equipment and a full engineering team to resolve safely. "Repair this coupling using only materials available in the plaza," she announced. "You have 30 minutes. Tommy examined the device carefully, noting the telltale blue scarring that indicated quantum energy had been trapped in the couplings. Matrix. Standard repair procedures would require a quantum isolation chamber and molecular-level fabrication tools, neither of which were available in the central plaza, but Tommy had learned long ago that human engineering often succeeded by finding unconventional solutions to impossible problems. He looked around the plaza, cataloging the resources available to him. Food service vendors, decorative displays, communication terminals, emergency equipment lockers. While hundreds of beings watched in silence, Tommy dismantled 2 communication terminals and extracted their quantum resonance chips. He then borrowed a food heating unit from a nearby vendor and carefully reconfigured its magnetic containment field. Using strips of decorative metal from a wall display, he created a makeshift isolation chamber around the damaged coupling. The repair process took 28 minutes and required Tommy to work with his hands inside the improvised containment field, directly manipulating quantum energy matrices that could have killed him if his calculations were wrong. When he finally activated the repaired coupling, it hummed with perfect efficiency, showing no trace of the cascade failure that had made it seem irreparable. The crowd murmured with appreciation, but Grex was not ready to concede defeat. A lucky repair does not prove intelligence. Anyone can follow standard procedures. The second challenge came from a Brath merchant who specialized in complex logistics. He presented Tommy with a 3-dimensional puzzle involving the optimal routing of cargo shipments through a network of 17 space stations, each with different capacity limitations and security requirements. This problem typically requires advanced computational analysis, the Brath explained. Solve it in 15 minutes using only manual calculations. Tommy studied the puzzle for several minutes, noting the mathematical relationships between the different variables. Instead of trying to calculate every possible root combination, he applied human pattern recognition skills to identify the underlying structure of the problem. He realized that the puzzle was essentially a variation of the ancient traveling salesman problem, but with additional constraints that created fractal patterns in the optimal solutions. By focusing on those patterns rather than trying to calculate every detail, he was able to identify the most efficient routing sequence in 12 minutes. The Brath checked Tommy's solution using his own computational device, then announced with obvious surprise that the human's answer was not only correct but actually more efficient than the computer-generated solution he had been using as a standard. Grex's confidence was beginning to waver, but his pride would not allow him to admit error. Simple tricks and lucky guesses? Give him a real challenge. The third challenge came from an unexpected source. Dr. Kellenny, the station's chief medical officer and a member of the highly advanced Ascendi species, stepped forward with a complex biological analysis problem. This genetic sequence contains a mutation that is causing system-wide failures in a patient's cellular regeneration process, she explained, displaying a holographic representation of DNA-like structures. Identify the specific mutation and propose a treatment approach. You have 20 minutes. Tommy stared at the genetic display, feeling overwhelmed. This was far outside his area of expertise, requiring knowledge of advanced biology and medical science that he simply did not possess. For the first time during the challenges, he began to doubt his ability to succeed, but as he studied the genetic sequence, Tommy realized that the problem could be approached from an engineering perspective. DNA was essentially a biological machine, with components that served specific functions and relationships that followed predictable patterns. Instead of trying to understand the medical implications, he focused on identifying where the machine was broken. Using principles of systems analysis and failure diagnosis, Tommy traced through the genetic sequence looking for components that were not functioning as designed. He found the mutation by treating it as an engineering defect rather than a medical condition, then proposed a treatment approach based on repairing the broken system components. Dr. Kellenny examined his analysis with growing amazement. This is remarkable. You have identified the mutation correctly and proposed a treatment approach that I had not considered, but which should be highly effective. How did you solve this without medical training? I treated it like a broken machine. Instead of a medical problem, Tommy explained. DNA is just a very complex biological system, and broken systems follow predictable patterns regardless of whether they're made of metal or living tissue. The plaza erupted in discussion as beings from dozens of species tried to process what they had witnessed. A human with no specialized training had solved 3 expert-level problems using approaches that none of the experts had considered. Grex stood in stunned silence, clearly struggling to reconcile what he had seen with his assumptions about human capabilities. Finally, he spoke in a voice that had lost all of its earlier arrogance. I do not understand how this is possible. Humans are weak, small, fragile. How can such limitations produce such results? Razor stepped forward, his bioluminescent markings pulsing in patterns that conveyed satisfaction and pride. Grex, you make the same mistake that many species make when evaluating humans. You measure their worth by the wrong standards. The Apex Commander's voice carried clearly through the plaza's acoustic systems, ensuring that every being present could hear his words. Humans are indeed smaller and physically weaker than most galactic species, but they possess something far more valuable than size or strength. They have the ability to see solutions where others see only problems. Razor gestured toward Tommy, who was still surrounded by the improvised equipment he had used for the first challenge. Look at what my Bond brother accomplished here. He solved problems that stumped experts by refusing to accept that conventional approaches were the only options. This is what humans do. They adapt, they innovate, They find ways to succeed when success should be impossible. The Apex commander paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. Your species, Grex, values strength and dominance. These are important qualities, and the Krolix have earned respect throughout the galaxy because of them. But humans have different strengths. They have compassion that drives them to help others even at personal cost. They have curiosity that pushes them to explore and discover. They have ingenuity that allows them to solve problems that more advanced species cannot. Administrator Vorthek stepped forward, his expression showing a completely new understanding of the situation. Commander Razor, Engineer Tommy, on behalf of Omega Station, I formally apologize for any disrespect that has been shown to humans working on this facility. I would also like to offer Tommy a promotion to Chief Engineering Officer with full authority over all technical systems and the respect that such a position demands. Tommy looked around the plaza at hundreds of faces that no longer showed mockery or dismissal. Instead, he saw curiosity, respect, and in some cases something approaching awe. The small human who had been ignored and belittled was now being recognized as a being worthy of honor and attention. Thank you, Administrator, Tommy replied. I accept the position, but only if it comes with a commitment to treat all beings on this station with respect, regardless of their size or species. Strength comes in many forms, and we all have something valuable to contribute. Grex approached slowly, his forearms held in a gesture of respect that Tommy had never seen a Krolix use toward a human. Tommy, I owe you an apology. I measured you by standards that were irrelevant to your actual worth. Would you allow me to learn from my mistake? Over the following months, Omega Station became a model of interspecies cooperation and respect. Tommy's new position allowed him to implement policies that valued contribution over physical dominance, and his friendship with Razor served as a powerful example of how different species could find common ground despite their obvious differences. The mockery and harassment that had once been common on the station disappeared, replaced by genuine collaboration and mutual respect. When new species arrived with prejudices based on size or appearance, they quickly learned that Omega Station operated by different rules. Tommy often found himself thinking about the lessons he had learned during his time on the station. Strength was not about size or physical power, but about the courage to do what was right even when it was difficult. Intelligence was not about memorizing facts, but about finding creative solutions to challenging problems. And worth was not determined by species or appearance, but by the willingness to help others and contribute to something larger than oneself. Late one evening, as Tommy finished reviewing the daily engineering reports in his new office, Razor arrived for one of their regular conversations. The massive Apex had become a frequent visitor to the station, using it as a base for his missions. In the sector, how are the new protocols working, Bond brother? Razor asked, settling into the reinforced chair that had been installed specifically for his visits. Better than I hoped, Tommy replied. We had a group of Saurian traders arrive yesterday who started making the usual comments about human weakness. But before I could intervene, a Krolix work crew defended us and explained that humans contribute value in ways that go beyond physical strength. Razor's bioluminescent markings pulsed in patterns that Tommy now recognized as amusement and satisfaction. And what did you think of that? I thought that maybe we're finally starting to understand each other. Not just humans and other species, but all of us. We're learning that the galaxy is big enough for different kinds of strength, different kinds of intelligence, different kinds of value. The Apex commander leaned back in his chair, his massive frame somehow managing to convey contentment and peace. Tommy, when I first met you on that crashed world, I thought you were just a human who happened to be brave enough to help a dying Apex. But over these months, I have learned that your courage that day was not unusual for your species. It was typical. Humans routinely risk themselves for others, solve impossible problems, and find ways to bring different groups together. Tommy smiled, thinking about all the humans working throughout the galaxy, quietly making their contributions and earning respect through their actions rather than their words. We're not the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced species in the galaxy, but we try to make things better wherever we go. And that, Razor said, his voice carrying the weight of profound respect, is why you will always be my brother.